I can't take this anymore. For times in 2 weeks. For times she's called the police on me for nothing but cooking in my own backyard. Do you know what it's like to have squad cars rolling up to your home when you've done nothing wrong? When you've spent 20 years wearing that same uniform? I've protected this community my entire career, and now I can't even grill some ribs without this woman trying to get me arrested or worse. But today is the last straw. Mrs. Patterson, you want to keep playing this game? Fine, but I promise you this. When I'm done, you're going to regret ever dialing those 3 numbers. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about standing up to neighborhood harassment and sweet justice, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. 3 months ago, I was unpacking boxes in what was supposed to be my dream home. After 23 years on the force in Chicago, I'd finally retired. My name is Marcus Washington, and I'd spent my entire adult life as a police officer. Started as a beat cop in some of the toughest neighborhoods and worked my way up to detective sergeant. I'd seen the worst of humanity, but I'd also seen the best. I'd never fired my weapon in the line of duty, something I took pride in. I was the officer who talked people down, who found peaceful solutions. My captain once said I could negotiate a confession from a brick wall. My wife Shanice and I had saved for years to buy this place. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, and most importantly, a beautiful backyard with a patio where I planned to perfect my barbecue recipes. Our daughter Aisha was away at college, but the extra space meant she could come home during breaks and have her own room again. We moved from the south side of Chicago to this quiet suburb just outside Atlanta. The neighborhood was called Meadowbrook Estates, one of those places with an HOA, manicured lawns, and the kind of quiet you only appreciate after decades of police sirens as your lullaby. The moving truck had barely pulled away when our neighbors started coming by with welcome baskets and casseroles. The Johnsons from across the street brought over a peach cobbler that would make your grandmother jealous. The Rodriguez family next door invited us to their son's graduation party the following weekend. Everyone seemed friendly, welcoming everyone except Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from 2 doors down. I first met Eleanor Patterson 3 days after moving in. I was outside setting up my new grill, a Weber Smoky Mountain that I'd been eyeing for years. I'd saved up my overtime pay to buy it as a retirement gift to myself. I was humming along to some Al Green, feeling good about this new chapter in my life, when I noticed a white woman in her 60s standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, lips pursed like she just bitten into a lemon. "Excuse me," she said, not bothering with any pleasantries. "I hope you're aware of the neighborhood covenant regarding outdoor cooking appliances." I straightened up and gave her my most neighborly smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Marcus Washington, just moved in. Nice to meet you." She didn't take my extended hand. Eleanor Patterson, Neighborhood Association Treasurer. Section 8, Paragraph C of our covenant clearly states that barbecue grills must be kept at least 15 feet from any property line and can only be used between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. on weekends. I nodded politely. "I appreciate you letting me know. I'll make sure to keep that in mind. Would you like to join us sometime? I make a mean rack of ribs." "No, thank you," she replied curtly. "I'm a vegetarian, and I find the smell of cooking meat offensive. Just keep your activities within the guidelines." With that, she turned on her heel and walked back to her pristine colonial house with its perfectly trimmed hedges. Shanice came out just as Mrs. Patterson was leaving. "Making friends already?" she asked with a knowing smile. I chuckled. "Not exactly. I think we've met the neighborhood watchdog." Shanice squeezed my shoulder. "Don't worry about it. We've dealt with worse. Remember that super in our first apartment who tried to evict us for having a baby that cried too loud? We laughed about it, but something about Mrs. Patterson's demeanor left me uneasy. 23 years as a cop teaches you to read people, and everything about that woman screamed trouble. That first weekend in our new home, I decided to break in the smoker. I invited the Johnsons and Rodriguez families over for a little informal housewarming. I woke up early, seasoned my brisket with my secret rub, and had it smoking by 10 a.m. sharp, making sure to follow the HOA guidelines to the letter. The fragrant hickory smoke drifted lazily up into the clear Georgia sky, and I felt at peace for the first time since retirement. Retirement had hit me harder than I expected. After decades of structured days, of purpose and camaraderie, suddenly having nothing but time was disorienting. I'd found myself waking up at 5 a.m. out of habit, reaching for a badge that wasn't there anymore. Cooking had become my therapy, something to focus on, to master. The slow process of smoking meat required patience, attention to detail, and care skills I'd honed over my years on the force. The gathering was going great. The kids were playing in the yard. The adults were swapping stories over cold drinks, and my brisket was developing a beautiful bark. Then came the knock at the door. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers on my porch. Young guys, probably rookies. I recognized the look, slightly uncomfortable, just following procedure. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, immediately falling back into the familiar rhythm of professional courtesy. "What can I do for you?" "So, we received a complaint about excessive smoke from your property," the taller one said. "I'm Officer Reynolds, this is Officer Diaz. Mind if we take a look?" I stepped back and gestured them in. "Not at all. I'm Marcus Washington. I was a sergeant with Chicago PD for 23 years before retiring last month." Their posture changed subtly, a slight relaxation, a look of recognition. The brotherhood of blue transcends geography. "The smoke is from my smoker," I explained, leading them through the house to the backyard. I checked the HOA regulations carefully. I'm well within the guidelines for distance from property lines and permitted hours. The officers looked at my setup, noted the positioning, and exchanged glances. "Looks fine to me," Officer Diaz said. "But we still need to file a report since a complaint was made. Do you know who might have called this in?" I didn't need to guess. Through the slats in my fence, I could see Eleanor Patterson watching us, phone still in hand. "I have an idea," I replied. "Let me give you my information." After they left, our gathering continued, but the mood had shifted. The Johnsons and Rodriguezes exchanged knowing looks. "That was Eleanor, wasn't it?" Mr. Johnson asked, shaking his head. "She's been a problem for years. Called the cops on our son's 16th birthday party for excessive noise. It was 7 p.m. on a Saturday, and we had 5 teenagers playing basketball in the driveway." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. "She tried to get the HOA to fine us for our Christmas lights last year. Said they were garish and culturally insensitive. They were regular white lights." As the day went on, I heard more stories about Eleanor Patterson's reign of terror over Meadowbrook Estates. She'd lodged complaints about everything from the color of mailboxes to the height of grass. But there was something else, something my neighbors were dancing around but not saying outright. Finally, Mr. Johnson pulled me aside as he was leaving. "Look, Marcus, I should be straight with you. Eleanor has a pattern. The Thompson family before you, black family, lovely people. They moved out after 6 months of Eleanor's harassment. Before them, the Nguyen's endured 2 years of constant complaints before they gave up. Just be careful, all right?" The implication was clear. Eleanor Patterson's complaints seemed to be more frequent and severe when directed at families who didn't look like her. Over the next few weeks, I tried to give Mrs. Patterson the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really was just obsessed with rules and regulations. Maybe she really did hate the smell of barbecue. But each time I used my smoker, always within HOA guidelines, the police would show up an hour later. Noise complaints, smoke complaints. Once, a completely fabricated complaint about suspicious activity in my backyard. Each time, the officers would arrive, see it was nothing, and leave with apologetic looks. Word had gotten around the local precinct that I was a retired detective sergeant, and most of the officers were professional and understanding. But the pattern was taking its toll. Shanice found me one night, sitting alone on the patio, staring at my smoker. "You thinking about giving it up?" she asked quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. I shook my head. "That's what she wants. This isn't about smoke or noise. This is about making us uncomfortable enough to leave. We could file a harassment complaint," Shanice suggested. "With what evidence?" She's careful. "Always works within the system. using regulations, bylaws, and anonymous complaints. Nothing overtly discriminatory that we could prove. Shanice sat next to me, her face illuminated by the patio lights. "So what are you going to do, detective? Because I know that look. You're plotting something." I smiled despite myself. After 25 years of marriage, Shanice could read me like an open book. "I'm going to do what I always did on the job," I said. "Build a case, gather evidence, and then I'm going to use the system that she's been weaponizing against her." The next day, I installed security cameras around our property, high definition, motion activated, with audio recording capabilities. I made sure they were positioned legally, capturing only my property and public areas. Then I went to work documenting everything. I recorded the exact positioning of my smoker, measuring the distance from all property lines. I kept a detailed log of when I used it, for how long and under what weather conditions. I installed a smoke particle monitor to measure the actual output. I even bought a decibel meter to record noise levels. For the next month, every time I barbecued, I invited different neighbors over, building community and witnesses simultaneously. I made sure to follow every rule to the letter, and every time the police showed up, I was polite, professional, and documented the encounter. Officer Reynolds became a regular visitor. By his fourth visit, he was clearly embarrassed. "Look, Sergeant Washington," he said, using my old rank out of respect. "This is getting ridiculous. We all know what's happening here." I nodded. "I know you're just doing your job, Reynolds, but I need a favor, an official one. I need copies of all these call reports. I'm making a case." He understood immediately. "I'll see what I can do. Between you and me, the captain's not happy about our resources being wasted like this. False reports tie up officers who could be responding to actual emergencies." Meanwhile, Eleanor Patterson had escalated. She started taking photos of my property, standing just at the edge of the sidewalk, public property, with her expensive camera. She filed complaints with the HOA about the unsightly security cameras. She even started a petition among some of the neighbors about declining property values due to excessive outdoor cooking. Most neighbors saw through it, but she managed to rally a small contingent of like-minded individuals, mostly older, mostly white, who began giving us cold shoulders and disapproving looks. The situation came to a head during Labor Day weekend. I had planned a big cookout: ribs, brisket, chicken, the works. I'd invited half the neighborhood, including several police officers I'd befriended. I'd sent formal invitations, including one to Eleanor Patterson as a gesture of goodwill, which she predictably ignored. I started smoking the brisket at exactly 10:01 a.m., within regulations. By noon, the party was in full swing. Kids were playing in sprinklers to beat the Georgia heat. Adults were mingling, laughing, enjoying the food and company. For a few hours, I forgot about the tension that had been building. Then I saw Eleanor marching towards my property, phone in hand, face contorted with anger. She stopped just short of my driveway. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The smoke is invading my home. I can't even open my windows. I've called the police, and this time I'm pressing charges for public nuisance." The gathering went quiet. I felt all eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. 23 years of de-escalating volatile situations kicked in automatically. I walked calmly to the edge of my property. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry you're disturbed. Would you like to join us? There's plenty of food, and I'm sure we can discuss any concerns you have." "I don't want your food," she spat. "I want you to stop this constant disruption to our peaceful neighborhood. Since you people moved in, it's been nothing but noise and smoke and cars parked everywhere." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like a thundercloud. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Officer Reynolds, who was off duty and enjoying a plate of ribs, set his food down and moved closer. Before I could respond, 3 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. This time, it wasn't the usual officers who knew the situation. These were officers from another precinct, responding to what had apparently been called in as a large disturbance with potential for violence. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The officers approached rapidly, hands near their weapons. They saw a crowd, raised voices, and a confrontation in progress, all filtered through whatever description Eleanor had given when she called. I recognized the danger immediately. "Everyone stay calm," I called out, raising my hands slightly. "Officers, I'm Marcus Washington, retired Chicago PD. This is a family barbecue on private property, all within local ordinances." But the lead officer was focused on the apparent confrontation. "Sir, step back from the woman," he ordered. "She doesn't even live here." Someone in the crowd called out, "She's the one causing trouble." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. I could see the confusion and tension in the responding officers' body language. In their eyes, this was a chaotic scene with unclear threats. Then my daughter Aisha, home from college for the weekend, stepped forward with her phone held high. "I'm recording all of this," she announced clearly, "and I'm streaming it live." Those words had an immediate effect. The officers' postures changed subtly. Eleanor's face fell. Officer Reynolds stepped up, badge in hand. "Officers, I'm with the 3rd Precinct. I can vouch for Mr. Washington. This is a peaceful gathering that has been repeatedly targeted with false complaints. What could have been a dangerous confrontation de-escalated into confusion, then clarification." The responding officers, realizing they'd been called to what amounted to a neighborhood spat rather than a legitimate disturbance, were visibly annoyed. The lead officer turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am, is this smoke actually entering your home 2 houses down?" Eleanor stuttered. "Well, I can smell it from my yard, and it's—" "Ma'am, making false reports to police is a crime," the officer interrupted. "This is clearly a normal backyard gathering within noise ordinances. I strongly suggest you return to your home." Eleanor stood there, red-faced, before turning on her heel and marching back to her house. The party slowly resumed, but the mood had been dampened. After the guests left, I sat with Shanice and Aisha on the patio, reviewing the day's events. "Enough is enough," Shanice said firmly. "This could have gone very badly today. You know better than anyone what can happen when police respond to a situation with bad information." I nodded grimly. Despite my career in law enforcement, or perhaps because of it, I knew the dangers of miscommunication between civilians and police, especially when race was an unspoken factor. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Aisha asked. "We can't live like this." I looked at the security cameras I'd installed, then at my phone with all the documented incidents and made a decision. I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to treat this like any other case I would have handled on the force. The next morning, I gathered all my evidence of video recordings, police reports, witness statements, HOA communications, and measurements proving compliance with all regulations. I arranged a meeting with the HOA board, the local police captain, and my lawyer, and I filed formal complaints of harassment, misuse of emergency services, and civil rights violations against Eleanor Patterson. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood, and the usually sparsely attended meeting was packed to capacity. Eleanor sat rigidly in the front row, flanked by her small group of supporters. I sat across the aisle with Shanice, Aisha, and many of our new friends from the neighborhood. The board president, a retired judge named Walter Simmons, called the meeting to order with a grave expression. "Before we address the regular agenda items, we have a serious matter before us. Mr. Washington has filed a formal complaint against Mrs. Patterson for harassment. Mr. Washington, you have the floor." I stood and walked to the podium, carrying a thick folder of evidence. For 23 years, I'd presented cases in courtrooms and precinct briefings. This was familiar territory. "Thank you, Mr. President, board members, neighbors," I began. "I'm not here tonight out of anger or revenge. I'm here because there's a pattern of behavior that's harming not just my family, but this entire community." Over the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented my case. I showed video footage of Eleanor monitoring my house, audio recordings of her comments, copies of the police reports from each false complaint, and statements from neighbors who had experienced similar treatment. In my career as a police officer, I continued, I learned that community safety requires trust, respect, and good faith communication. False reports to police don't just waste resources. They create dangerous situations and erode that trust. I then revealed what had been my ace in the hole: statistics from the police department, obtained through official channels thanks to my law enforcement connections, showing that Eleanor Patterson had made 67 complaints over the past 5 years. 53 of those complaints were against households of color. None had resulted in actual citations or charges. This isn't about barbecue smoke, I said finally. This is about a pattern of targeted harassment using regulations and emergency services as weapons. And it needs to stop before someone gets hurt. When I finished, the room was silent. Eleanor's face had gone from indignant to ashen as the evidence mounted. When the board president asked if she wanted to respond, she stood shakily. I have only ever tried to maintain the standards of this community, she said, her voice thin. If some people don't want to follow the rules. Mrs. Patterson, interrupted Walter, the board president, the evidence clearly shows that the Washington family has meticulously followed every regulation. What it also shows is that you have systematically targeted them and other families in a manner that could be construed as discriminatory harassment. The board deliberated briefly before delivering their decision. Eleanor Patterson was removed from her position as treasurer, fined for misuse of HOA resources, and placed on probationary status within the association. Additionally, the police captain announced that any future complaints from her would be thoroughly scrutinized before officers were dispatched. That the most significant consequence came a week later, when Eleanor was served with a civil lawsuit from the city for misuse of emergency services, with potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. The years of documented false calls had finally caught up with her. The Sunday after the HOA meeting, I fired up my smoker at 10:01 a.m. precisely. As the sweet smell of hickory and slow-cooked meat filled the air, neighbors started dropping by, some just to chat, others bringing side dishes for an impromptu gathering. By mid-afternoon, my backyard was again filled with laughter and conversation. From my patio, I could see Eleanor Patterson's house. Her car was in the driveway, but her curtains remained drawn. She didn't emerge all day. A month later, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard. By Christmas, she had moved to a retirement community in Florida, and a young interracial couple with twins had purchased her house. We brought them a welcome basket and an invitation to our New Year's barbecue. Shanice found me on the patio that New Year's Eve, tending to the smoker as our new neighbors and old friends mingled inside, sheltering from the winter chill. "Tenny for your thoughts, detective?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. I gazed out at our neighborhood, truly ours now in a way it hadn't been before. "I was thinking about systems," I said, "how they can be weapons or shields, depending on who's using them and how." She rested her chin on my shoulder. "You turned her own weapon against her." "Not exactly," I corrected. "I just made the system work the way it's supposed to, protecting everyone equally, enforcing rules fairly. That's what I tried to do my whole career. And now, are you finally at peace with retirement?" I smiled, turning to face my wife of 25 years. "I think I've found my new beat. Good food, good neighbors, and the occasional battle for justice when needed." As midnight approached, our house filled with the countdown chant. I looked around at the diverse faces of our neighbors. Black, white, Latino, Asian, all joined together in community. This was what I had protected and served for all those years. This was worth fighting for. 10, 9, 8. I squeezed Shanice's hand, thinking about how close we had come to giving up, to letting one person's bigotry drive us from our dream home. 7, 6, thighs. I thought about Eleanor Patterson and felt an unexpected twinge of pity. How empty her life must have been, to be so consumed with controlling and excluding others. Sia. 3, 2. I thought about the lessons I wanted to pass on to Aisha, about standing your ground, about using knowledge and procedure rather than anger, about building community instead of walls. 1. Happy New Year. As cheers erupted and glasses clinked, I felt truly at home for the first time since leaving Chicago. Sometimes, justice comes in unexpected forms, not through dramatic confrontations, but through methodical evidence gathering, community building, and simply refusing to be driven away. The next summer, Meadowbrook Estates held its first annual neighborhood barbecue competition. I won the grand prize for my brisket, but the real victory was the sight of children of all colors playing together on lawns where invisible boundaries had once stood. Eleanor Patterson's former house had been painted a bright, cheerful yellow, technically within HOA guidelines, but definitely pushing the boundaries of the approved color palette. No one filed a complaint. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about confrontation. It's about claiming your rightful place in a community and refusing to be defined by someone else's prejudice. It's about using the very systems that have been weaponized against you to create positive change. As a police officer, I had sworn to protect and serve. In retirement, I found a different way to uphold that oath, by protecting my family's right to live peacefully and serving up some of the best barbecue in Georgia. And maybe, just maybe, by turning one neighborhood's culture of suspicion into a culture of celebration, one plate of ribs at a time. The sweet smoke from my smoker still rises over Meadowbrook Estates every weekend, but now it's joined by the smoke from half a dozen other grills and smokers as neighbors have taken up the hobby. That smoke doesn't represent division anymore. It signals gathering, sharing, community. And on the rare occasions when someone new moves in and raises an eyebrow at the multi-ethnic gatherings that spill across lawns and driveways, they're quickly brought into the fold, handed a plate, and told the story of how a retired cop's barbecue smoke changed a neighborhood. Because sometimes, justice tastes like perfectly smoked brisket, shared with neighbors who have become friends. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply living well on your own terms, in the place you've rightfully claimed as home.